That on climate change, especially, I think the changes that are needed are going to be really painful. It isn't just a question of recycling
No.
or even buying an electric vehicle. What would it mean if our economy didn't run on fossil fuels?
This is another episode of a special series called Enough for All of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. This series sheds light on 75 years of an NGO called CWS. My name is Maurice Bloem and I welcome you to another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen.
Yeah, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the special series called Enough for All of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest, who will ask her to introduce herself. Beth, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Beth Ferris. Right now, I'm a professor at Georgetown University and director of our Institute for Study of International Migration. I've had a long career in the humanitarian world. I worked overseas, primarily through the World Council of Churches, also with the Life and Peace Institute in Sweden. I've taught at several universities. I was a Fulbright professor to Mexico. I was the head of Church World Services Immigration and Refugee Program back in the 90s. So I've done a lot of different things, and I've always cherished my time with CWS. I'm presently a board member of the Church World Service.
Yeah, I mean, you really have, you've worked for us, you've worked with us, and now you're part of the board. Excellent. And always, being very supportive in, helping with research that CWS has been doing. And yeah, I mean, it's incredible, and you're so knowledgeable. So I really appreciate you. Do you still remember the first time that you heard about CWS?
I was working in Geneva. I started in the late 1980s, working at the World Council of Churches. And I would always hear about Church World Service, CWS this, CWS is coming to town, they're organizing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got this sensation of Church World Service as a real leader in the refugee world, both
Mm-hmm.
with UNHCR and with the different agencies. And there was always kind of an aura of respect. Oh, Church World Service is doing this. So my earliest memories of CWS was hearing about what I thought was this big, powerful, incredible organization. I later learned it wasn't so big and powerful, but it is an incredible organization.
Yeah, but so you did not hear about CWS, when you were young, because many when I talk with them about the crop hunger walk. So you. So that's not how you were introduced.
Part of that.
Okay.
No, not at all. I heard about it on the international stage.
Yeah.
I'm a Quaker. I taught in various U.S. universities, but I wasn't involved with CWS before I started hearing about this big, powerful organization in Geneva.
Okay. And so tell us about when you worked for CWS as a staff member. How did that happen? When and what were the challenges at that time, and how is that different than what's happening now, according to you, or what is similar?
Sure. Well, after working at Church World Service, World Council of Churches for 6 or 7 years, I went to Sweden and worked at the Life and Peace Institute. My career has kind of gone back and forth between humanitarian operations. I'd get burned out. I'd go work at an academic institution. I'd get bored. I'd go back to the field. Anyway, so I've gone back and forth. And we were living in Sweden, and, on a family level, it was about time for us to move back to the U.S. Our kids were approaching high school. If they, wanted to go to university in the U.S., it would be good to be back there. So we were beginning to think about moving back to the U.S. And then I got a call from Bill Sage, who worked at Church World Service, and he said, we're looking for a new director for IRP, the Immigration and Refugee Program. Will you apply? And talked to my husband, and my husband, it was wonderful. And he'd always said from the day we got married, I'll follow you anywhere. I'll follow your job anywhere except in New York. Won't go to New York. I hate New York. Anyway, and
Yeah.
so I turned to him and I said, hey, you want to go to New York? And he said, wait, what? And as we talked about, he said, well, go ahead and apply. It doesn't hurt to apply. And anyway, I met with the committee. I think we really hit it off. We were on the same wavelength, my commitment to churches and faith and refugees and so on. And so we moved to New York. We actually lived in New Jersey, which was kind of the halfway house for my husband. And I headed up IRP from it was 1993 until 1999 or 2000. And it was the hardest job I've ever had by far, because there were so many different partners. There were the denominations, and there were all the government agencies, and there were this incredible network of local affiliates and the international partners, and different levels of governance. And CWS was then part of National Council of Churches, so I got involved with a lot of NCC actions. But it was high pressure work. We were dealing with refugees and arrivals, and things had to be right, and dealing with government contracts, which are very complicated and very demanding, and at the same time trying to maintain a faith perspective through all of that. And those were the years of Bosnia, Rwanda, major international crises. And so those were tough years, but it's certainly the most, or one of the most rewarding experiences I've had working with refugees. It was really a privilege to work with such just a fantastic network of people, each in their own way, trying to live out their faith by supporting others. And in my particular program, by welcoming refugees or advocating for their rights. And so it was a wonderful and exhausting experience, the 6 years I spent with Church World Service.
If you compare it to what you had to do and what's happening now, how different or how similar is it?
I think there are the basic similarities, trying to meet the needs of refugees, whether they're arriving in the U.S., and ensure that priorities of the people most at risk are the ones that are resettled. Back in the 90s, the border situation was difficult, and there were always inconsistencies in U.S. policy toward Central Americans, toward Haitians, toward people from the former Soviet Union. But now it's just more complicated. It's more politicized. It's linked with security, with terrorism. And those weren't issues back in the early 1990s.
Yeah. And when do you think that shift happened and within the States? Or you can't put your finger on?
It was 9/11. 9/11 was the turning point. This feeling that we're being threatened by Muslims from attacking us from elsewhere. And, suddenly Muslims came under scrutiny in neighborhoods where they had been accepted. And, you saw this anti-Islam backlash. You saw this fear of foreigners. I think that was the turning point.
Yeah, but what do you like about the work of CWS?
The thing I've always appreciated about Church World Service is its blend of being deeply rooted in the faith communities. And I think that's important and sets it apart from many others. And at the same time, very professional. I mean, staff can, certainly hold their own with the big, huge secular organizations working in this field. So it's that combination of being grounded in faith and in grassroots communities and working in partnership and really being committed to partners all around the world. And at the same time, having this high level of professionalism and the quality and nature of the work they do.
So after you left CWS, you've done, many things,
Lots of things.
as you explained. But then a couple of years ago, you came back as a board member. So how was that different? How is it different to be a board member instead of a staff member, or is it similar? Yeah.
Well, it's quite different. I mean, I think as a board member, you're looking at big picture issues and strategic directions, and some of those areas where it's good to have outsiders to help think through some of the issues. I remember as a staff member thinking that our governing bodies really didn't know what we were going through. The level of pressure and the kind of internal dynamics and staffing issues and budget issues and so forth. And, as a staff member, you want to look good for your board, or your governing bodies. And I think we did. And so sometimes when I'm in board meetings, I'm thinking, I wonder what's going on behind the surface here. I bet there's more that we're not hearing about, which is fine. I don't think it's the board's role to delve into that, but I guess I'm just kind of more keenly aware of the multiple pressures that staff face. And, my sympathies are always with staff and their workload levels. I think CWS has tremendous staff, but they're under a lot of pressure. And part of the pressure comes from their own commitment of seeing more that they can do and taking on more responsibilities than they should. And so I think as a board, there's always an element of kind of wanting to protect the staff, sometimes from their own good intentions.
Is that, when you talk about that, is that also what you worry about most as a board member? Or are there, additional, issues where you think,
No, the things that I worry about most, the thing that I worry about most as a board member are the big external forces. The level of politicization, what happens when administrations change in the U.S., what's happening in the world. Will there ever be solutions for Rohingya refugees, for example? Will these horrible, scandalous, protracted displacement ever come to an end? There's always a lot of interest when there's a new refugee situation, and your hearts go out to Ukrainians and Afghans and others. But the folks who've been refugees for 30 years in Tanzania, the 200,000 Burundians that have been confined to camps. Who's caring for them? So I worry about some of these international pressures. I think the UN has failed in keeping peace and security. The Security Council is blocked from playing the role it should play. And so humanitarian agencies, including, I would say, Church World Service, are there to put the Band-Aids on, do the best they can, and to help the victims. But, until we stop these conflicts, that work is going to be never ending and never totally satisfactory for people who want to go home.
And you were talking about, Church World Service is there to put some Band-Aid on. Do you think we should or we could do more in terms of more looking at root causes and contributing there to the more sustainable solutions than the Band-Aids?
Yeah, of course. I'd like to see Church World Service and faith-based communities generally do more to resolve conflicts or stop conflicts from developing. There are some tensions for humanitarian organizations getting involved with root causes because it is always political. There are always oppressors who need to be called out. And, for organizations, particularly those working overseas, there's sometimes tensions. You call out the government of Myanmar and maybe you're not able to work in that country anymore. And there are desperate humanitarian needs. So it's not an easy decision to focus on root causes or dealing with the drivers of refugee situations. But, I do think we need to figure out a way to be more effective in that. And there, I have a lot of confidence in faith communities and Christian ecumenical communities. We have a lot of political clout that we're simply not using. Most members of Congress are members of churches, including many who are members of churches or are members of CWS that, can be called upon and reached out to and lobbied to stop some of these wars, and the same internationally. So I think we could be doing more on root causes, but it's not straightforward. It's not easy.
And what are some of the allies then at CWS or organizations like ours should be collaborating with? How do you see that?
Well, I think we've got a ton of allies, both in churches, faith groups all around the world. We've got allies in almost every local community in the U.S. through some of our church members, through the crop hunger walks, through other outreach activities. We have a lot of allies out there. Maybe we don't ask enough of them. We ask them for money or sometimes to sign a petition or call their member of Congress. But maybe there's more we could do. I participate often in the ecumenical advocacy days, and it's just such an uplifting experience to see all of these people from around the country who are joining forces on a particular issue for one particular day, and to see the impact they can have in Congress. I mean, maybe we ought to be doing more of that.
Great. And I'm happy to hear that you are lifting up the ecumenical advocacy days, because I really think it is underestimated, the power that it has and what it does in terms of people that are participating and realizing that they can do something as an individual. Because often I think, don't know, Beth, what you think about it, we are so overwhelmed with all the challenges, right? And then some of us maybe end up doing nothing because we think, that we can't make a difference. And you can make a difference, I think, as an individual as well. Don't underestimate that. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'm a political scientist, and sometimes I think I do too good a job of explaining the complexity of the systems we work in. Too good a job in the sense that it's totally disempowering. You see all of these forces together, and what can little old me do? Oh, I might as well just stay home and, I don't know, play solitaire on my computer or watch another sitcom. But there are things you can do. Yeah, maybe I'll just tell one of my stories that I always think of when I think of, what can I do? Sometime back in the 90s, I visited Malawi with a delegation from the All Africa Conference of Churches to look at the refugee situation. And Malawi then was hosting some 1 million refugees for 10 years. And so the night before we were to visit the refugee camps, we had a kind of a social hour with local pastors. And I asked one of the pastors, "Oh, tell me about the refugee camp we're going to tomorrow." And he said, "Well, actually, I've never been there." And I said, "Oh, it's just a couple of miles down the road." And he said, "Well, we've got other pressures in our church. We don't have many members. We have problems with the roof." And then he got really embarrassed, and he said, "Can I come with you tomorrow?" And I said, Sure. And we put him in the van with this group from All Africa Conference of Churches and went off to the refugee camp. And, some refugee camps are like settlement, like villages. You'd be hard pressed to tell it's a refugee camp. But this was one that was filled with recent arrivals who just walked in from the bush in Mozambique. And we walked around, and a lot of people were zombie-like. They were just staring with no expression. And it was really eerie, this zombie-like mood in this camp. And the pastor was walking with me, and he said, "I can't take any more of this. This is why I don't come to these places. Let's go." And I said, "Okay." So we went off to the entrance, and there we saw a group of 20 or 30 Mozambicans coming in, all women, no little kids, which tells you about the dangerous journey they'd been on. They hardly had any clothes. They were hungry, and the person from UNHCR met them as they sat there at the gate, and the UNHCR staff person said, "Well, here's a bucket for you. Now you can go get in the queue and get some water. And then there's a queue over there to get some firewood so you can boil water. And here's some mealie meal, their staple food that you can cook." And the pastor standing beside me suddenly got this huge smile on his face. He said, "There's nothing we can do to ease the pain in this camp, but we can provide a hot meal for people when they arrive. We can have the food cooked so they don't have to go wait in line for water and for wood." Actually what he said is the women in our church can come produce the meal for the refugees. But there was something about breaking down this enormity of this refugee problem into something concrete. We can provide a hot meal for people. That I always remember when we think about how big these problems are. You have to find your little bit, your niche where you can make a difference, and then do it. So, I think that's a challenge we all face.
No, thank you for sharing that. I absolutely believe in the power of one as well. So yeah. Thank you for sharing. Beth, I started this special series because I think now 1.5 years ago, Church World Service celebrated its 75th anniversary or 1 year. I don't know exactly because since COVID, the years are so messed up. But when the organization celebrated its 50 year anniversary, it produced a book. The organization produced a book, and it was called 50 Years of Help and Hope. And we did not make a book now. I kind of say now, okay, now we have a podcast series where we talk about CWS. But if you would be asked to come up with a title for a book after 75 years of CWS, what are some of the keywords that you think should be in the title of such a book?
I would keep the word hope. I think that's been really central to all the work. I mean, I would call it something like hope through partnerships, and given away from this notion of we are helping you, but we're together striving for a better world, and we work through partners and with others. It's never just CWS who's doing something. It's always, a host of allies with us. So I would say something like hope through partnership.
Yeah, let me ask you a question about that partnership. What does that actually mean in practice?
I think for CWS, I think it means a lot of things. I think it means, internationally working with local partners, local churches, local NGOs, local interfaith organizations. I think we've broadened the scope of partnership, which is great. It means, doing things together, not just coming in and saying, well, this is a program, this is what you need. It's really working together to figure out what the needs are, where the energy should be placed. Sometimes it's about money, we need money to do this. Sometimes it's about advocacy. Can you, advocate with our government so that refugees can go to school, for example. Sometimes it's at the international level. We've got lots of partners. I think UNHCR is a partner. Whether or not there's a funding relationship or not, we are working for the same goals. In the U.S., all of the local affiliates and all of their members and relationships are part of this network, this incredible network that CWS has. And again, I often tell my students, regardless of your religious orientation, there are no networks equivalent. There's nothing like the Christian International Network, whether it's Catholic or Protestant. These networks extend into the tiniest African villages, to metropolitan Latin American cities, to, I don't know, from Louisiana to Alaska to Arizona, everywhere. So, I think that, Church World Service, is often challenged by all these partnerships, but that it's a real source of strength.
When we are talking about 75 years of hope in partnership, the story I tell, and you don't have to agree with me at all, but I say it started in 1946 as a Christian organization working ecumenically, and I think we have evolved into a more global organization, a more global interfaith organization. If you will hear me say that, do you agree? And if so, why? And if you don't agree, also explain, why you think it's different with what I just said, or more complex than, the simplification that I just gave.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it's good that we've expanded the scope beyond just Christian or ecumenical. Interfaith work is terribly important in most regions of the world. I would also include secular organizations in there. I mean, there are a lot of people, pouring their hearts into their efforts for human rights groups, for example, that don't have a religious connection and may not be a matter of faith, but where they have high moral, ethical concerns. And, I don't think, Christians are necessarily better than other people in terms of their values, but at the same time, I worked for years in the ecumenical world, and
Mhm.
what I sometimes saw was that it was much easier for progressive Christians, say, to work with progressive Muslims or progressive Jewish
Mhm.
communities than to work with conservatives in their own
Mhm.
tradition. So it's easier to develop an interfaith
Yeah.
organization than to
Yeah.
work with Christians who don't share a certain political or
Mhm.
progressive viewpoint. So sometimes it seemed almost like an escape from confronting the realities of
Mhm.
dealing with your own tradition. And that's also true. I mean, I heard from some of my Islamic and Jewish colleagues, they had the same feeling. Oh, it's
Yeah.
easier to
Yeah.
work with these progressive Christians than with the really radical Jews or whatever.
Mhm. But part of the maybe that shift in the organization, well, as you know, because you've been part of the discussion, is looking at our brand, and I think especially the conversation started because we seem to have challenges in reaching out to a younger audience. And one possible challenge that we have is that our name of the organization is called Church World Service, and church scares off some folks. If they know more about us, then there is not an issue. So again, what I have to say is, the conversation that we have around brand is much more complex than only changing the name of the organization. But let us focus on that for a moment. What do you think about CWS having having had conversations about changing the name of Church World Service to something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a possibility, and it might open the doors to support from others who are turned off by the name church. There is something kind of institutional about churches working together. I would like to see some reference to faith or
Mhm.
something, because I think that is an important part of our heritage. Some have suggested, as other organizations have
Yeah.
done, to just move away from Church World Service to CWS or
Mhm.
CWS Global and not. HIAS has done that. It
Mhm.
used to be the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. Now it's just HIAS.
Mhm.
Really to distance a little bit from that particular association, and yet without going through a full-fledged name change, to come up with
Mhm.
something completely different where you might lose some of your present constituents. So, I mean, I think it's a discussion to be had when it's maybe a little bit clearer where CWS is going, and
Mhm.
how it views itself in this overall landscape of, on the one hand, development organizations, on
Mhm.
the other, faith-based initiatives. Those are issues I think that need some deeper reflection.
From your point of view, where do you think CWS should go? What should they do? Or what type of discussions does it need to have?
Um, yeah, I think we need to be a part of these discussions and part of this movement for racial justice and environmental justice, both those two big issues of our time. On race, I've always been proud of CWS because this is not a new issue. This is something that the organization has struggled with, at least as long as
Mhm.
I've been
Yeah.
associated with it, probably from the early days where, even back in the 90s, there were concerns about diversity among staff and, who are we reaching? And, how are we using the contributions of the historic Black churches, which have made such a contribution to church world service in the field, not just of racial justice, but in
Mhm.
terms of solidarity and outreach and so on. So, these are, I don't know, I just see that racial justice is ingrained in all of the work of CWS,
Mhm.
and there's more that can be done, but there's an awareness of race and the importance of things like diversity and inclusion, and that is different from other organizations who, I don't know, who kind of wake up and say, "Oh, George Floyd, oh yeah, we ought to do something about race," and that isn't the case with Church World
Mhm.
Service. It has been grappling with these issues for a long
Yeah.
time. I think the whole issue of climate change, it is the big issue of our time, and I had a guest speaker, an old humanitarian hand who's worked for 40 years on humanitarian issues, and And he told my class of graduate students, he said, drop everything you're doing and work on climate change. All of you want to work in the humanitarian sector and work with refugees, but the burning issue is going to be stopping these emissions because our planet is in peril. And this should be the priority. It's not business as usual. And I think for Church World Service, it's a question of, how do you incorporate the urgency of responding, addressing, and fighting against climate change with the very real day-to-day pressures and you see and where you can make a difference. It's hard. It's hard to to decide to work on something that will probably bear fruit in 10 or 20 years when you have people who are hungry and who are scared and who need assistance now. So that balance between responding to short-term, immediate, life-saving, urgent needs, and at the same time finding the energy to tackle these big issues of climate change, particularly stopping these greenhouse gas emissions, it's a challenge how to do it all at one time.
In the other, well, let's call it a regular series that I have, I talked a couple of weeks ago with an economist. Well, he's not originally an economist, but now he works on economy-related issues. And he wrote a book called Thrive, and where he discusses, Buddhist economy and donut economy, etc. And basically, what he was saying, we know that we need to have systems changed, but the system is so much ingrained within us. We have lost so many things. We lost our connection with nature. We think only in terms of, growth. But we should be thinking about, he calls it existential economics. It got me thinking in terms of, I think it's necessary to look at yourself as well as an organization. Is the role that we are playing at this moment the role that we should be playing? And those are difficult things, right? In terms of it relates to the story of the babies that were going down the river and the village saving the babies out of the river. And then after a while, somebody says, where are these babies coming from? And then one person says, well, we should go upstream, and said, no, we have no time. We have to take care of these babies. So difficult, stuff. But that, Beth, I have had a lot of conversations with the younger generation, especially for CWS. How do we relate to them? They are demanding, actually, that, we have these tough discussions and action that needs to be taken now. So it's interesting time, not easy, but yeah.
Yep, but on climate change especially, I think the changes that are needed are going to be really painful. It isn't just a question of recycling or even buying an electric vehicle. What would it mean if our economy didn't run on fossil fuels? But on climate change especially, I think the changes that are needed are going to be really painful. It isn't just a question of recycling or even buying an electric vehicle. What would it mean if our economy didn't run on fossil fuel? The summertime, for example. And those kind of changes, I think, are going to be really tough. And, I really hope that churches and Church World Service, when, are able to make the point that this is really a question of survival. It isn't a luxury that you're doing to be politically correct. And I don't know, I read an article yesterday that said, if you want to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, don't go for Amazon's overnight delivery. The more trucks they have and the more trips they have to make, the more they pollute. Take your time and order things that take 2 weeks to deliver. They'll be more efficiently processed. And I thought, well, that makes sense. And I thought, I don't know any of my relatives who would do that, who would give up the convenience of next day delivery to do their little part unless there was an assumption that this was mandated or that everybody was doing it. But, I don't know. I think that, particularly Americans are so used to creature comforts that, giving them up. Let me send a check to an environmental organization, but I'm not sure about turning off my air conditioner in August. So,
I'd like to quickly respond for two things. I think the younger generation is making those choices. Actually, the folks that I've been talking with, they don't order at Amazon. That's
right.
one. Second, they're changing their food habits.
Right.
Drastically. So, yes, and that is putting, then the shops, they need to change
Right.
as well. So,
Right.
so I see if we talk about hope, I
Yeah.
see a lot of hope there. But a lot
Yeah, I
needs
do
to be
too.
done.
I see. I see a lot of hope in young people too. I mean, one of the reasons I love teaching is that you're just inspired all the times by the initiatives they take and their commitment, and so I have a lot of hope with the younger generation.
A totally different question, which I always ask as well. If I ask you to come up with a piece of music or a song that best embodies what CWS is about, what piece of music or song would that be?
Well, I really like some of the international ecumenical movement, and I don't know why I associate this song with church world service, but Tuma Mina is one of my favorite songs, and I know there's something about the humility in that song. Lord send me, Lord help me. That I find very moving. I like to think that church world service embodies that approach at least, and plus it's just such a beautiful song.
Okay, great. And I've made a special Spotify song list. So
oh, I didn't know that. That's great.
That. So the people that I've talked with, they mention their song. It's I think it's cool to listen to it. If I ask you to come up with a typical anecdote or a memory about CWS, which story would you tell?
There are so many. I think the best stories I have from CWS are visiting local affiliates, local churches, refugees just being resettled. And they kind of all run together, in terms of the welcoming attitudes of the people that we worked with. And I always found it just such a shot in the arm, sometimes you get my experience was you get so bogged down with budgets and administration and processes and bureaucracy in New York. And then you go out to North Carolina or to Knoxville, Tennessee, and you see what people are doing, and the difference they're making in the lives of refugees. And it was always just a tonic. I felt like I needed it to get through all the bureaucracy that you have to, at least you had to do. Maybe you have less bureaucracy now, but I doubt it. But just seeing the local faith in action is really energizing.
If I ask you to name a colleague or a partner or a supporter of CWS who best embodies of what CWS is about, who would you name and why?
There are two names that come to me for different reasons from the time I worked at CWS. One is Jennifer Riggs, who at the time was head of the Disciples refugee program. Yeah. She'd been a member of the then governing committee for the immigration and refugee policy work. And, she was solid. She was always there. She was there when we had plenty of money and when we were desperate and laying off staff.
Tough as well.
She was there. She was tough, and she was certain. Yeah, she was.
I love her.
But I think it was just that, she was solid, creative, always there when you needed her there, always encouraging, always hopeful. That level of commitment really, really stuck with me. And another, almost in a similar vein, was John Backer, who worked for I don't know, 30 plus years, in the early days of meeting boats from Germany. And, he was, when I met him, he was older and, not as spry as he used to be. And he had a really hard time with computers. But again, he was there. He was solid. He was steadfast. He cared deeply in his own quiet, gentle way. And, just did an enormous amount for CWS. And I don't know, there's something about his humility and, doing whatever you wanted and not wanting ever any credit or ever wanting to make a public report or something that was, I think, really special. And I'm glad that CWS now has an award that's named after him. I think that's quite moving.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And when I came from Indonesia to New York, I still worked with him. He actually was retired, but he continued to come to the office and work. It was wonderful. Absolutely. I'm really happy that you named him. Yeah, I mean we are slowly coming to the end of our conversation. It always goes fast. If you would like to wish something for CWS, what would that be?
I wish there were greater public awareness of the good work CWS is doing. My sense is that staff and board alike are so busy keeping things going and running the programs that there's not enough effort put into, as my mom used to say, tooting your own horn and talking about all the great work you're doing. So I'm an avid follower of Twitter. I get a lot of my news that way, at least as long as Twitter lasts. And I often see, lots and lots of reports from other non-governmental organizations working with refugees about all the good work they're doing. And, I wish I'd see more of CWS there. I think people on the inside know what good work CWS knows, but, whether it's CWS or the government or other refugee-related organizations. But I'd like to see more public outreach, more acknowledgement of what CWS does, not for acknowledgement's sake, but to build a greater constituency to support CWS in its work.
And I hope that, people will be listening to this podcast and the previous episodes and the future ones, because I think it's not, I think it's great to listen to, the stories that are being told by present board members, colleagues, and ex-staff and colleagues and partners. Not only to hear about the work of CWS, but also to as part of the learning, what happens with organizations and how they evolve and the struggles they have, but also the great accomplishments that they are making, and especially this one that has been there since 1946. And I still think, yes, of course I'm biased, but I still think a lot of great work is going on. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences, memories, and wisdom.
Sure.
I always
have to tune into the podcast and hear some of the others as well.
Yes, please do. Because let me know what your thoughts are. And it's the same question to the listeners. Please don't only listen, also let us know what you think about it, because we try to continue to improve it. So thank you so much, Beth. And all the best with what you do. And we will see each other in all the meetings that we always have. So
thanks, Maurice, and good luck.
Great.
So that we all can be.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you want to know more about Church World Service, please check out cwsglobal.org. Thank you.